As Rebecca said, my name is Grant Olson. I'm here from Seed Savers Exchange. I've been there for about 3.5 years. My job is to teach people sort of how to save their own seeds and encourage them to participate in the seed exchange and participate in things like the seed library that you have back here. What we're going to be talking a little bit about today is we'll be talking generally kind of about heirloom seeds and open pollinated seeds. We'll be covering kind of the basics of saving seeds from a couple different plant types. And then we're going to talk specifically about how to save seeds from beans, peas, lettuce, and tomatoes. Those are some easier crops to get started saving seeds from. So we'll talk specifically about those, and then we'll have lots of time at the end to answer questions as well. If you are a seed saver and you've already saved seeds from some of these crops and you're curious about cabbages or kale or broccoli or Brussels sprouts or carrots or some other things that maybe you haven't saved seed from in the past, I'm happy to answer those questions as well. Does anyone save their own seeds? Maybe we should start with, who's a gardener here? Great. So Seed Savers Exchange, we're based in Decor, Iowa. Has anyone been up to the farm before? I know Rebecca was there. Great. So it's about 3 hours north of here, but in the summertime it's a great place to come, especially August, September. By September we've got some apples in the orchard as well. So the main purpose of the farm is to grow out this large seed collection that we have, that has sort of grown as the organization has grown over the past 40 years. We have 2 orchards there as well, and about 700 different varieties of apples that you're welcome to go and sample. We've got lots of classes and workshops, a couple bigger events like our tomato tasting event every year is held on Labor Day weekend on Saturday. And last year we had about 50 different tomatoes for folks to sample. We had about 80 the year before that. So it's a great time to come and kind of experience all this diversity that we have in our collection that we offer through the commercial seed catalog, but also a lot of diversity that is grown and shared by folks like yourselves and members of ours that really help facilitate this seed exchange that we organize. So we're a nonprofit. Who's seen our commercial seed catalog before? Does anybody get that? You've got seeds in the card catalog back there as well. So the commercial seed catalog is a way of kind of funding the nonprofit work that we do, and our mission is up here to sort of save North America's garden heritage for future generations. We do that a few different ways. People are often most familiar with the commercial seed catalog that we offer, and that's a way of distributing rare seeds on a pretty large scale. We also facilitate a seed exchange that I'll talk about a little bit. And then we maintain a seed bank as well that has about records of 25,000 different heirloom and heritage crops. Does anyone recognize this flower here? This is a morning glory, absolutely. This is a morning glory we call Grandpa Ott's morning glory. This is sort of the seed that started the organization. Grandpa Ott's morning glory was given to one of our co-founders, Diane. Diane's grandfather is on the right here, and he would grow these morning glories every year along the porch of his house, and he would train them. You can see they're kind of posing in this square that he's created, but he would sort of make little play areas for Diane and her siblings as well. And so Diane had these great memories of playing in these morning glories as she was growing up. Something that was really important to her, and she had gotten married. She was ready to start a family of her own, and she thought it would be great to have some of these morning glories that my grandfather grew as well, so I can share them with my family. She got a hold of some of these seeds. He gave her a little box full of these seeds, and he said, these are seeds that my dad gave to me, and he brought them to Iowa here when he came from Germany in the 1800s. And that was something she had never known. She hadn't really thought much about where these morning glories might have come, but upon hearing this, she kind of realized this is something that had been passed down in her family for a number of generations. She felt a lot of responsibility for it because she thought, if something happens to my garden, if something happens to me, and I'm the only person taking care of this variety, it could be lost forever. It's really fragile when it's just being taken care of by one person. So her idea was to share these seeds with as many people as possible, so that if something happened to her or her garden, there would be other gardeners that were taking care of this variety. This is a picture of when they decided that they wanted to start this network of people to share these seeds. They sent letters to Mother Earth News, this is a page from Mother Earth News, Countryside Magazine, Landward Ho, these different kind of back to the land publications, and they said, basically, I've got rare seeds. I know that there are other folks out there that also have seeds that are really important to them that they want to protect, and we should start a little seed exchange. So that first year there were about 30 people that responded to their letter. This is the third catalog, the third annual, what was then called the True Seed Exchange. This is the first one that had a cover on it. They took all these letters that people had sent to them, they published them into a 6-page document that first year and sent it out to everyone with the hope that people would get in touch with one another and they would exchange seeds. And that seed exchange is still going on today. We just got this 2014 edition printed. It's about 500 pages long. There are about 13,000 unique varieties that are listed in it. There are fruits, vegetables, flowers, herbs, and grains, mostly seeds, but there's tubers, there's cyanwood for apples and pears and other fruit trees. You can get raspberry canes, you can get strawberry crowns, asparagus crowns, you can get horseradish roots, rhubarb roots, you can get all sorts of different plant material through this seed exchange, and it involves about 13,000 of our members every year. And it still works the same way. People send us a list of varieties that they want to share with other people. We put that into a database that we print out every year into this 500-page seed exchange publication that we call the yearbook. And then we also have an online site as well. This is what the website looks like. It's got a lot more pictures, the yearbook, because it has so much material in it. It doesn't have any photos. But here on our online tool, you can go in, whether you're a member or not, you can go in and browse this, look at all the different varieties that we have here. You can see this is the tomato listings. There's 9,273 listings for tomatoes. These are tomatoes that people are offering from all different parts of the country and several different countries internationally as well. We've got folks in Japan, and Sweden, Norway, Belarus, Australia, New Zealand, a few other countries as well, lots of Canadian members. But the idea is the same as it was when Seed Savers Exchange first started. We want to make it really easy for folks to share seeds with one another. We think that there's a lot more to seeds than just buying seeds from a seed catalog, and when you're buying seeds from a seed catalog, the story kind of starts right there. But when you're saving seeds and when you're sharing seeds and when you're getting seeds from friends and neighbors and family members, they're coming with a long history as well, and you're kind of just becoming part of that story that's already ongoing. And we think that's really important. As the seed exchange was getting started, folks were trading seeds, but there were some instances where gardeners were getting a little bit older. They weren't sure how much longer they were going to garden. They were nervous that if they didn't pass these seeds on, that they might disappear. Not having anywhere in particular to send these seeds, they started sending them to our co-founders, Diane and Kent, who started collecting all these different packages. Folks often just sent in a package like this and wrote whatever information they had about the seeds on the package itself. So here is a picture of just some bubble wrap, basically, with some notes about this particular squash on the packaging. This is a paper bag that somebody donated a sweet potato in, and so they wrote out a little bit of the family history with this sweet potato, what it looks like. So Diane and Kent started a seed collection basically on their kitchen countertop. And you can see it's a little bit disorganized here. They were really surprised at how many people were sending seeds to them. They hadn't expected that this was going to be part of the seed exchange. They moved this seed collection into the basement because the kitchen counter had filled up. But shortly after that, they received a donation of about 1,200 different bean varieties from a gentleman in Maine. And so they realized that they needed to take care of this collection. It's not like a stamp collection where you can just put them in a folder, you can file them away, and you can take them out when you want to look at them or when you want to show them off. Seeds are living things, and they need to be cared for appropriately. They need to be grown out every once in a while. So this is about the time Seed Savers Exchange moved to Decor, Iowa. They were in Missouri before. This is what one of our seed storage rooms looks like today. A little bit more sophisticated. It looks a little bit, it may look just as disorganized as the other photo as well, but we've got all the packets are bar-coded. The seeds are stored here. This is not our longest term seed storage. The seeds in here are stored at about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Very dry conditions. Our longest term seed storage, what we call the seed vault, is about 3 degrees Fahrenheit in there. That's well below freezing. It's very dry. The moisture content in the seeds is between 5 and 8%. Those are really ideal conditions for seeds. We store them in those conditions with the expectation that they'll last dozens of years. For some plant types, they might last hundreds of years. We want to grow these out as infrequently as possible. Every time that we grow these out, we want them to look exactly as they did when the person donated these varieties to us. And so the more infrequently we can grow them out, the less likely it is that a deer is going to come along and eat all the plants, or a pest or a virus is going to find its way into the seeds. So we store them for as long as possible. This is a picture of the farm, as I mentioned. The farm's purpose is to grow out all these different varieties that we have in the collection, save some more seeds, and then store those seeds or distribute those seeds through the seed exchange. So we grow a lot of the different varieties that we have in tents like this. Looks like there's some carrot flowers in the foremost tent here. It's a big farm. It's about 900 acres. We've got about 25 acres that are actually in garden production. And the gardens are kind of spread out around the farm, so we can prevent 2 different varieties of peppers from cross-pollinating with one another. To also prevent that, we'll grow things in tents like this. We'll hand-pollinate our corn and our squash as well. So we take a lot of measures to make sure that these varieties are really being maintained in a way that every year you plant those seeds, it's the variety that comes up is going to look just like the parent plant. We want to maintain those characteristics as long as we can. So this is a picture of this year's seed catalog. The seed catalog offers about 600 different varieties and is kind of the #1 source of funding for the nonprofit preservation work that we do. I mentioned the morning glories. We do focus on family heirlooms, things that have been passed down through a family or passed down through a community, passed down amongst friends and neighbors. Heirlooms can be defined in a number of different ways, but we define heirlooms pretty loosely as seeds that have a story, seeds that have a history of being shared and saved amongst a certain group of people. We typically refer to heirlooms when they're at least 50 years old. It's not really a hard deadline, but there isn't necessarily a certain age that an heirloom has to be, but generally other folks will refer to those. We'll refer to these varieties as heirlooms if they're at least 50 years old or pre-1950 sometimes. And again, they do have a history. They've got this history of being saved and shared amongst Diane's family. Has anyone grown this variety of watermelon here? So this is a Moon and Stars watermelon. Really great, big, kind of old-fashioned picnic watermelon. It's called Moon and Stars because it has these great big yellow spots, which would be the moon, and then all these smaller spots, the stars there. This is a variety that was offered in commercial seed catalogs. It was sort of first introduced commercially in the 1920s. This is a page from 1924, Henderson Seed Catalog. It was offered and it appeared in commercial seed catalogs for a number of years, but the mid-1900s, there were 30 or 40 years that this variety had just about disappeared. Nobody offered it commercially. Nobody knew exactly where to find it. Seed Savers Exchange had been kind of traveling around to different TV stations doing interviews, and our co-founder Kent had mentioned that this is a variety that had once been grown but had disappeared, and we were sort of looking for it. Sure enough, on one of these broadcasts in Missouri, a gentleman, Merle Van Doren, heard the broadcast, and he said, well, I've got some of those seeds. I've been growing this and saving the seeds for years. So he kind of reluctantly gave us some of the seeds as well. We've been able to reintroduce this commercially. So there's lots of seed companies now that offer Moon and Stars watermelon or Moon and Stars type watermelons. And it really just took one person saving those seeds and then sharing them with someone else to bring that variety back from, from near extinction. Does anyone, the colors are maybe a little off. Does anyone recognize this tomato here? Yeah, green zebra. This is one of my favorite tomatoes. I really love green when ripe tomatoes. This is a variety that folks often refer to as an heirloom, but it's not exactly an heirloom. It was bred in the 1970s. It was offered in commercial seed catalog, a very small one in the maybe the very early 1980s. So it's not that old. It doesn't really have a history with just one person, but it is an open pollinated variety. And it it has become kind of a gardener's favorite, particularly among our members. And so we think it's really important to preserve this as well and encourage people to save and share these open pollinated seeds. Open pollinated varieties can kind of be distinguished as non-hybrid varieties. Who's heard the term hybrid before? So hybrid varieties, they're sort of, how are they? They're kind of described as they're really only a variety for one generation. You get a big hybrid, like a big boy tomato, you plant those seeds. It comes up and it looks like a big boy tomato, but if you try to save those seeds and plant those seeds again, the fruit that results or the plant that results won't look anything like the parent plant, or it won't be exactly like the parent plant. So hybrid varieties, you can't save seeds from them reliably. You can't get the same variety year after year after year. With open pollinated varieties, however, these are heirlooms and these are old heritage crops. These open pollinated varieties, they are maintained every year just by saving the seeds, planting them again, and getting that same variety. This is a variety of pea. This is called Grandma's pea. When we are talking about preserving these varieties, we're finding out more and more that it's not really enough just to preserve these varieties for the variety's sake. There's a lot of significance to these different varieties genetically. They've got a lot of great traits that we want to preserve and that we want to carry over into future generations. But there's also cultural aspects as well of these varieties that we think are just as important to save. So this is a variety of pea. This was donated by this gentleman, David Nieswanger. We've got hundreds of varieties of peas and beans and tomatoes that are just called Grandma's tomato, Grandma's old soup bean, all these different varieties that folks just inherited from their grandmother or their uncle or their grandfather, and not having anything else to call them, they called them Grandpa Ott's Morning Glory, for example, or in this case, Grandma's pea. This is a variety of pea that has kind of an interesting history. It was grown out by this gentleman's grandmother who brought this variety of pea along in a wagon train that was headed from Missouri to Texas, but along the way the family had some hardships, and so her brother died and her father died along the way, and it was a kind of an arduous journey, but throughout this time she continued to save this pea, to grow this pea when she could, and eventually pass the seed onto her grandson, who then shared it with us as well. So we're kind of preserving this cultural history as well. We talked a little bit about just the savings of if we want to grow. My wife and I are kind of looking at seed catalogs right now and trying to plan how much seed we're going to purchase. And luckily we work at Seed Savers and we can get a lot of these seeds for free. But yeah, purchasing seeds can be hundreds of dollars every year if you have a big garden and if you want to grow a lot of your food. So saving your own seeds just from things like even just taking out the peppers and tomatoes, beans, peas, lettuce, maybe a squash variety as well. That can go a long way, absolutely. Some of the other reasons that we kind of encourage people to save seeds and to grow all these different varieties is that by saving these seeds, as we kind of, as I showed with the Moon and Stars watermelon, it really just takes one person preserving a variety to really allow that variety to continue. These are different potato varieties that we have in our collection. We've got a collection of about 700 different potato varieties and 75 different sweet potato varieties. And you can see there's lots of different colors and shapes and sizes, lots of different textures as well. And is anyone who's familiar with the Great Famine in Ireland, the Irish potato famine? So the Irish potato famine was a result of most folks in Ireland growing just one variety of potato called the lumper. When potato blight came into the country, it found a niche in one of these plants, and potatoes are cloned. You're just planting tubers, so you're cloning the plant, and so there's an entire country of genetically identical plants that weren't any more or less resistant to this blight, this fungus that came into the country. And so after potato blight sort of found a niche in these plants, it had a whole country to spread to. Southern corn blight epidemic in corn is another example in the 1970s, where there were only a handful of varieties of corn that were being grown across the country. This southern corn blight found a niche in those plants and totally devastated the corn crop for several years until they could release new varieties that were a little bit more resistant to that. By having this diversity and by encouraging gardeners to really grow lots and lots of different varieties, and if I'm growing a variety of tomato, maybe my neighbor's growing another variety of tomato, having that diversity can really guard against different disasters like the corn blight or like the Great Famine in Ireland. And it's also a way of kind of figuring out what does best in our particular location. This is another kind of illustration of why we think it's important to save seeds, and as I've said a couple times, it really just takes one person saving a variety to then share those seeds with other folks and get that variety back out into the public. So here, this graph on the top of the graph shows in 1903, someone did a study where they looked at all the different varieties of, let's say, cabbage that were offered in commercial seed catalogs in 1903, and they found that there were 544 varieties of cabbage that were offered. They went back 80 years later to the National Seed Storage Laboratory and to see how many of these varieties of cabbage were still around. They found only 28 of those varieties are still around, and so those other 500 and some varieties of cabbage are probably gone. Maybe somebody's saving those seeds somewhere. But this is the seed bank that they did this survey is where we back up our seed collection as well. So if they don't have it, we don't have it. It's really likely that those 500 varieties of cabbage are gone. So by saving your seeds every year, sharing the seeds, you can help prevent some of this. And this is the reason that a lot of our members get excited about seed saving, or it's the reason why they started saving seeds in the first place, because they had a variety that was really important to them, and one year they looked in a seed catalog and it was gone. Luckily, maybe they had some seeds left over, or they had a friend or a neighbor that had some seeds left over, and they got a hold of that variety and they thought, well, I don't want to lose this variety, and the only way for me to be sure of that is to save these seeds myself and to grow them and to share them with other folks. I talked a little bit about the cultural aspect as well with Grandma's peas. This is a variety of peppers. Anyone grown this pepper before? This is a variety of pepper called the fish pepper. It's really ornamental. It's got these striped fruits and the leaves are variegated, so they've got dark green leaves with splashes of white on them. They're kind of compact plants. But this is a variety of pepper that sort of has a tradition of being used in this cuisine kind of around the Chesapeake Bay area, and so they would use this pepper because it doesn't really release a lot of color when it's cooked, and so they could make these white fish sauces with this particular pepper. It's got a really unique flavor and not so much heat, but enough to know that it's there. And so by preserving this variety of pepper, you're not just preserving this pepper, you are kind of preserving this cuisine as well, and you're preserving these traditions that are associated with it. Saving seeds as a gardener, it was great to see so many of you kind of save your own seeds as well. Historically, if you were a gardener, you were also by default a seed saver. Seed catalogs sort of serve to reintroduce or to introduce new varieties to consumers. But really, if you had a variety of tomato that you liked, you saved those seeds every year. You planted them out the following year, and that was sort of the norm, really until the early to mid 1900s, when that changed and commercial seed catalogs really became a lot more popular. Folks went back to them every single year because there were so many new introductions. But saving seeds as a gardener can be as simple as just harvesting a tomato fruit, cutting it open when you're ready to eat it, scooping a few seeds out, letting those seeds sit around for a few days, and then rinsing them off, drying them out, and storing them. For if you've got soup beans that you're growing, it really is just keep setting a couple beans aside that you're not going to put into a soup and planting them out the next year. Incorporating seed saving into gardening can be really simple for some crop types, and we'll talk about some of those crop types in particular here. We're going to talk specifically in a little bit about tomatoes and how easy it is to save seeds from tomatoes, from beans as well, peas, which are very similar to beans when you're saving their seeds, and then lettuce as well. Before we get really into seed saving, I want to talk just briefly about sort of what a seed is. This is a bean seed here that we split in half. This is a variety of bean called Blue Jay. It's hard to tell in this picture, but it's a very blue variety. It's the seed coat is very blue. It kind of darkens and gets a little bit more purple as it ages, but it's called Blue Jay. Yep, this is a variety that was discovered by one of our members in his garden. He was a bean collector. His name is Russ Crow. He lives in Illinois. He grew out dozens of different beans every year, and one year he found this variety just by chance in his garden. He knew what one of the parents was, but he didn't know what the other parent was. But he saved these seeds. He planted them again the following year, and this came up again. And he thought the bean seed coat kind of looks like a Blue Jay because it is buff and tan and blue, and so he named it Blue Jay, and has since offered it through our seed exchange. And unbeknownst to him, somebody had picked this variety up and sent the seeds to Canada, where it's now a commercial variety of bean that he just discovered in his garden. So pretty fascinating story. These are pretty simply the different parts of a seed. A great description of a seed that I heard once was: a seed is a plant in a box with its lunch, and that's very appropriate. A seed is a tiny embryonic plant. You can see here. You can see the leaves kind of folded up there. Those are what will eventually become the first true leaves. The food source here, the lunch. This is a cotyledon here, so this is the first thing that comes out of the ground in regular beans and other beans that stay underground. But this is the food source. So as long as the plant is enclosed in this box, the seed coat here, this protective coating, this little tiny embryonic plant needs to use this food as it is sort of in storage and as it awaits conditions that are appropriate for it to germinate. Seeds are formed when pollen moves from the anther, which can be thought of as the male part of the flower. When pollen moves from the anther to the stigma, and then a tube forms, and genes from that pollen grain fertilize the ovary, and then that's where the seeds are formed in the ovary. Understanding seed saving has a lot to do with understanding how pollen is moving from the anther to the stigma, and then how those seeds are forming then as a result. In this flower here, not every flower has both male and female organs in each flower. Some flowers are only male, some flowers are only female, and in fact some plants are only male and some plants are only female. I think it's also helpful that, as I said, a lot of seed saving is kind of understanding what's going on in the flowers. And flowers really exist to produce seeds, and this is something that when I first came across this, it was really helpful. I remember when I was a kid, we would grow carrots out in the garden, and I'd never seen a carrot seed on the plant anywhere before. I had no idea where it was, but I knew that they were small, and so I thought that if you cut open a root, the seeds must just be inside that root there. But that was not quite right. And I didn't have this understanding, this really basic understanding that seeds really need flowers first. And so if you haven't seen flowers on your plant, then you probably haven't seen seeds on your plant as well. Something like a carrot, you can grow it for a whole year in the garden and you'll never see a flower because it's a biennial, because it needs a second year to produce flowers and then as a result to produce seeds. Same thing with beets as well, with cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts. Lots of different plants that we grow in the garden are biennials, and so they go through a first year of growth. They only produce kind of vegetation. Typically we'll eat them in that first year, but if we would let them stay in our garden, if we would cover them with straw, keep them a little bit warm over the winter, they would produce seeds then the following year for us to save seeds. But just understanding that seeds come from flowers, and if you're looking for seeds, start by looking for the flowers. Does anyone know what this is in the picture here?
Looks like lettuce.
Some lettuce, yeah. This is a really knowledgeable group. There's lots of groups that nobody has ever seen any lettuce plants that have gone to seed, and I certainly hadn't. I hadn't seen any lettuce plants that had gone to seed, and I grew up gardening with my dad, but when lettuce started to bolt, we cut it out, and that was it. But lettuces are annuals, so you plant the seeds, and then within that first year, they'll produce seeds again. So lettuce is an annual, beans, peas, There are lots of plants that we grow as annuals in the garden that would be perennials in other climates. So peppers, for example, and tomatoes would be perennial in the Mediterranean. But in our gardens, we plant them, and as soon as frost comes, the plants die, and so they kind of treat them like annuals. But they produce seed in just the 1 year. And then there are biennials as well. This is a little bit tougher one, maybe. Does anyone know what this is here? Yeah. Wow, this is a great group. So this is, I believe this is Swiss chard here, but Swiss chard and beets are the same species. They look just about identical in this stage of their life. But they get really big. They'll get 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall. I've seen some photos of chard that's 9 feet tall with its flowers. It's got really tiny, kind of inconspicuous flowers. I can pass them around. These are dry, but there are some beet seeds here on the bottom, but there's a little bit of the stalks, the flower stalks as well. I'm also going to pass around this lettuce as well. This lettuce is getting kind of tired, but you can see some of the flowers. Lettuce is a real distant relative of dandelions, and so they have these same feathery parachutes that dandelions do. And I talked a little bit about biennials. Biennials need 2 years to produce seed. So carrots, beets, all the cole crops, onions. And in addition to different life cycles, plants also have different ways that they pollinate. Does anyone know what this flower is here? It's a pea flower here. So peas, beans, lettuce, most tomatoes, they're self-pollinating. So the pollen moves just from the anther to the stigma, and it doesn't even leave that flower. They have both male and female organs. The pollen doesn't go very far, and that flower pollinates itself. What about this flower here? Okra, absolutely. So okra has both male and female organs. It has the ability to self-pollinate, but it's very big, it's very showy, and it's got these sort of landing dots for insects to visit the flowers here. So it's very likely that an insect might be moving pollen from this flower to another okra flower. It can self-pollinate, but insects will do the job as well. What about this flower here? Squash flower here. So squash flowers are either male or they're female. There are maybe a few flowers that have both male and female organs. Those don't often set fruit very well. These insect-pollinated plants, they require insects to move pollen from the male flower to the female flower. You can tell the difference. The male flowers just have a very long stalk, and the female flowers have a tiny little immature fruit at the base of the flower. So it'll look like a tiny zucchini or a tiny watermelon at the base of the flower. What about this one? I was hoping I would stump the group. It's not oats. It's related to oats though. These are corn flowers here. So corn is like squash. It has separate male flowers and separate female flowers. So the male flowers are the tassels up at the top, and these are the anthers here, kind of sticking out of the tassels. And you can see lots of little tiny fine pollen grains there. So pollen falls from the male flowers up at the top. It lands on the silks. The silks that are sticking out of an ear of corn. Who's shucked corn before? I know we're in Iowa. I expect to see all the hands up. Each little silk is a stigma, so pollen falls onto those silks, fertilizes the flower inside, and then that forms a kernel. Now during this pollination process, I don't want to say something can go wrong, but something that can happen that isn't ideal for seed savers out in the garden. If you have a variety of tomato like this, you've got a big red ribbed tomato. You plant it out in your garden, and right next to it you plant this little tiny yellow cherry tomato. If an insect moves pollen from this little tiny cherry tomato to this big red tomato, and you save seeds from it and plant it again the next year, you might end up with something like this, something that has traits of both, something that maybe looks like one and tastes like the other. You're not exactly sure what you're going to get. And so if insects are moving, or wind, if pollen is moving between two different flowers of plants that belong to different varieties, then you can end up kind of losing the characteristics that might make a particular tomato your favorite, or the most attractive to grow in your garden. So cross-pollination isn't ideal. This is a perfectly good tomato. Cross-pollination isn't going to, it may in some cases give you tomatoes or fruits that don't necessarily taste very great, or maybe they don't have characteristics that you want, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily unusable. This could be a perfectly good tomato. It's just not exactly what you expect, which is why it's not ideal for seed saving. I want to talk a little bit about a couple crops that are easy to save seed from. Again, tomatoes, beans, peas, and lettuce. These are easy because, as I mentioned, they're self-pollinating, so you don't have to worry about that cross-pollination much. Certainly not with most tomatoes, certainly not with lettuce, and certainly not with beans. So something that gardeners are often concerned about is, well, if I want to grow 2 different varieties of tomatoes, but I don't want them to cross-pollinate, what do I need to do to prevent that? For most tomatoes, for beans, peas, and lettuce, just grow them a couple feet apart, and that's probably sufficient to keep those varieties distinct. If you've got something really rare and really valuable and you're not sure if you can ever find those seeds again, you might want to grow them even further apart from other varieties. But for the most part, 5 feet, 10 feet. Commercially, we'll do 15 to 20 feet, and that's enough to prevent cross-pollination from happening in most cases. So for tomatoes, who saved seed from tomatoes before? All right, I feel like I don't even have to go through this. Do you guys ferment your tomatoes too? Yeah. Great. So tomatoes, you cut the tomato open, squeeze the seeds out into a container, and then you just let them sit for a few days, 2 to 3 days, no more than 3 days. Mold can form on the top. It's not terrible if it happens, but ideally you'll be stirring this every day. If the seeds sit in that mold for too long, those seeds might not be as healthy when you plant them out again the next year. So just 2 to 3 days. Stir them, rinse them out. Does everybody know why the fermentation process is important? Great, I can share something with you. So tomatoes have, and cucumbers to some extent have this as well, but particularly tomatoes, the inside of a tomato is really an ideal place for a seed to sprout. It's very warm and it's very moist, but it wouldn't be beneficial to that tomato fruit if the seeds were sprouting on the inside. So it has these enzymes inside the fruit that prevent seeds from sprouting. What happens out in nature is that these fruits just fall on the ground. They rot, and that rotting process breaks down all those enzymes, and then the seeds can sprout a little bit easier. The fermentation process isn't necessary, but we find that it really helps the germination. And it also really makes the seeds a lot easier to work with. If you don't go through this fermentation process, the seeds are really clumpy and they stick to one another. That fermentation process breaks down all this sticky flesh that hangs onto the seeds as well. So after they ferment, rinse them off, and then set them out to dry. We find that coffee filters work really well because it wicks moisture away quite quickly. And the seeds also don't stick to coffee filters like they do to paper towels or paper plates. We'll talk about beans a little bit next. So when we talk about tomatoes, we talk about tomatoes as being wet-seeded crops. They have seeds that are encased in some kind of fleshy fruit. So tomatoes, squash, eggplant, melons, watermelons, all these plants might be considered wet-seeded crops. For dry-seeded plants, you really want them to dry out and the seeds to get very hard and dense as much as possible when they're still on the plant. If it's getting to be pretty cold or if the weather's getting really wet, you can cut the entire plant and bring it inside, but it's ideal to leave it outside on the vine. So for beans, like the beans that I've passed around, they're very dry and brittle, the pods are. And the seeds are very hard, and that's really important. That's a great indicator of when a seed is ready to be harvested. If the seeds are very hard, if you can't dent them with your fingernail, then typically that's a good indicator that the seeds are ready to bring inside. So these are a couple different stages of maturity in a bean pod. If you've got green beans, you just let them continue past the point that they're green beans, and eventually they will get hard and the pods will get very dry. And then for dry-seeded crops, particularly ones with pods, if you've got radishes or if you've got cabbages, mustards, peas and beans, there's a couple different steps that will separate the seeds from the other junk, and that other junk is called chaff. So threshing just involves applying some amount of force to seeds and pods to liberate those seeds from the pod. So for Beans in this example, she's just threshing these beans with her hands, just crunching them up, breaking the pods open and letting the seeds out. You can also put the seeds in a sack like this and jump up and down on them or dance up and down on them. I've seen people hang pillowcases full of beans in a tree and hit it like a piñata before. You can really get creative. Your kids are really good at this intuitively, I think, at breaking these pods open. As long as you're not damaging the seeds, any force that's kind of breaking open these pods is great. And then winnowing. Has anyone winnowed before? Great. So this is such a huge time saver for a lot of these crops. And even though I still like, and my wife still likes to just sit on the couch and kind of pick through beans and peas, winnowing makes such short work of a big bag of bean pods. So beans are and seeds in general are the densest part of the plant. It's where all the good stuff is, and so they're very dense. Typically seeds, besides something like auric or lettuce, they're very aerodynamic as well. And so when you put them in front of an air current, these seeds just fall straight down into the bucket, and then the pods get blown off to the side. So it's allowing an air current to blow all the light pods and chaff away, and then letting the seeds just drop down. So this is just after one pass, and you can see all the seeds there, all the chaff there on the outside. It really is pretty incredible how quickly that this winnowing process can separate the two. This is a trial of all these different lettuce varieties that we have. Each little row is a different variety of lettuce plants. We've got a little bit different techniques for doing it now. You can pick a couple leaves off the edge of a lettuce plant when it's early. But as soon as it starts bolting, then the lettuce isn't great anyway. Something that happens with lettuce often, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but it tends to kind of, I refer to it as melting. It's kind of rotting. But the leaves at the base of the plant will just kind of melt and turn into this black-brown goop. And you can just peel all that off as best you can and let the air flow kind of back into there, and that airflow will prevent that rot. Lettuce is a desert plant, and so it doesn't really like these hot, humid summers that we have, and so they have a tendency to rot. Loose leaf lettuces are a lot easier to save seed from because they don't have that same tendency to rot, whereas these really tightly headed lettuces hold moisture inside. You can cut an X in the top of the lettuce head to let that stalk emerge a little bit quicker and let more airflow in there. Lettuce flowers will open up at different times on the plant. They've got little tiny yellow flowers that look like tiny dandelions. The flowers open up, and they're only open for a couple hours before they close up again. And then 2 to 3 weeks after those flowers open up is when the seeds are ready. It's kind of hard to tell when lettuce seeds are ready, but they'll fall from the plant pretty freely. So 2 to 3 weeks, what I would do is put an X on the calendar as soon as I see some lettuce flowers on the plant. 2 to 3 weeks after that, I go out there with the bucket, tip the plants over, shake the flower head into the bucket, and the seeds that fall out should be good. I'll visit the plant every week after that, just for a few weeks, doing the same thing, harvesting flowers or harvesting seeds that way. You can, I don't know if you're in a hurry or if you don't really care about getting all the seeds that you possibly can, you can just pull the plant up or cut it off at the base, put it upside down in a bucket, and then the seeds will continue to mature there. This is a pretty rudimentary test we have for determining how dry seeds are. We call it the snap or shatter test, where we'll take a bean or a pea seed, we'll put it on a table and we'll hit it with a hammer. And if it shatters like this here, and like this one in the back, we know that it's dry enough to be stored. And then this one up here you can see is just kind of smushed out. It hasn't really shattered the same way. So we would let that sample of seeds continue to dry. For things that you can kind of get your hands on, we try to break them like these squash seeds here. And if they snap really cleanly, we know that they're dry enough for storage. But if they bend like the seed on top, then we'll let them keep drying out for a little bit longer. When you're storing seeds, it's really important to label them well, to put the name of the variety, to put the plant type, to put potentially when you harvested it. I know that there are a lot of great gardeners here, but I bet it's very difficult to tell two different tomato varieties just by their seeds.
So you think you can.
Exactly. Yep. And I often I often put things in envelopes and I set them aside and I think, oh, I know that one's green zebra. I know this one's, but the envelopes look pretty similar too, so it doesn't help. I like to put when I harvested it, so I know how old the seeds are, a little bit of a description about the variety. And then I like to include where I got the seeds from. This is what we call a listed member code. This is something we use in our seed exchange, but that's just telling me where I got the seeds from. So if something happens, if I grow them out and they come up looking different, I know that I can find those seeds again. So after you've got your seeds stored, I really encourage people to also share seeds as well. And I think a lot of examples that we've seen in our own collection, somebody might have been saving seeds for a very long time, but without getting those seeds out into the hands of other gardeners, it's not necessarily as if they're totally lost, but they're lost to most of the rest of us. So it is important to share seeds as well, particularly if you've got something rare. But seeds are something that really everyone should have access to, and it's a reason why we're really excited about seed libraries like this one that are opening up and allowing folks to access seeds with the thought that they'll grow those seeds, they'll save some, and then they'll share them again. I think that's really, really exciting, really important. We travel around to different seed swaps every year that bring gardeners in for kind of a one-day seed swap event. We also encourage folks to share seeds through our seed exchange as well. If you're a member, love to have you share your own seeds through the Seed Savers Exchange. I want to kind of finish with one example here of I guess the importance of sharing seeds, and this kind of brings it full circle. This is a letter that we received in 1987. It was from a woman named Phoebe Vincent. She was 87 when she wrote this letter to us. She was turning 88 the next month. And she said, I've got this brown variety of lima bean. I got it from my mother when I got married and left home. It's brown and my kids don't really like it and they don't want to grow it. So I don't have anyone to share these seeds with, but I'd hate to see this variety lost. So she sent the variety to us with the hopes that we would take care of it. This is a picture of the lima bean here. It looks a little bit unremarkable. It is very pretty, but it is a typical brown lima bean. After we got a hold of this lima bean and we had this letter, we knew a little bit about the variety, but we didn't think enough. So we've hired a seed historian in the past 3 years to kind of go through all these varieties in our collection and find out more about them. So she found a photo. What she often finds are photos of the person that donated the seeds. She'll find photos of their graves on genealogical websites. So she'll find obituaries, and then through those, through those resources, try and get in touch with the family. So our seed historian, Sarah, was able to get in touch with the family through one of these genealogical websites. And she got in touch with Phoebe's great-granddaughter, who put us in touch with her mother. So we spent a lot of time talking to Phoebe's granddaughter. And Phoebe's granddaughter lived with Phoebe for a number of years. She sent us some old photos of Phoebe. And so this is a photo of Phoebe and her husband, Jesse, when they got married. So this is a photo of conceivably like the same day or the same year that Phoebe got this variety from her mother. We learned that Phoebe and Jesse got married in 1919, so we knew that this was a very old variety. We also got photos of Phoebe and Jesse kind of 50 years later. And so these are kind of interesting pieces of the story, and they don't necessarily say a lot about the bean itself. But we are kind of building this whole cultural tradition around these different varieties that we have in the collection. We think that's just as important to save as well. We also got photos of Phoebe's parents. So this is Phoebe's mom on the right. Phoebe's parents were from Germany, so through this kind of research, we realized that this variety of lima bean might have come in from Germany. Since we've been in touch with the family, Phoebe's granddaughter has asked for some of these seeds back as well, so it is kind of coming full circle in that we have this variety that somebody shared with us because she didn't have some place to share it with immediately. There wasn't a lot of interest in it, but by growing it out and saving the seeds and sharing the seeds, we're able to give it back to the family as well. So that can be kind of, again, a part of their gardening tradition and a little bit a part of their family history as well. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at our Seed Exchange website. As I said, you don't have to be a member to look at what's available. You can take a look at those 9,000 some different varieties of tomato listings, lots and lots of photos there. You can get in touch with other gardeners through the site as well.